So last but not least, we have a panel session where hopefully I'll kick off with some questions that were set to me actually on some of the things that people wanted to get out of today's event. We'll use that to kick off the panel session, and then hopefully we'll get some questions from the audience, and we'll get a discussion started, although controversial it is, which we can then proceed. There'll be some drinks served afterwards as well after this. So hopefully it'll spark some debate. So the first question that I want to start, which has been sort of the theme of the day, but it's really on everyone's minds. And I'd like to start with you, Richard, and then we'll each one by one. How can AI be leveraged not just for incremental improvements, but to fundamentally disrupt and redefine current statistical programming practices?
You want to start there, right? I think the idea of AI, like LLMs, if you take a step back, that can be used to change the processes. I think we really need to step back and think about how do we do clinical development? What is the sequence? And what I see now is that there are different silos. Right? You have a data management silo, then you have a statistical programming silo, then you have the statistical silo, then you have the medical writing silo. I think that if you really want to implement AI, Gen AI, you need to sort of start building bridges between these functions. I even have an integrated approach to what you're doing. And AI can help speed up that process, because if you start thinking about using AI, you need to start thinking about, okay, how does the flow work? Am I being clear or completely incoherent? Define the flow. So you get data management, right? And then you have the programmers who read the SAP and write the tables, lists, and figures. Then you have statistics who basically write the SAP, and then you have the medical writers who write the programs, or write the statistical study reports. Sorry. If you are able to intertwine these parts of the processes, for example, you have a protocol, and the protocol defines the structure of your data. If you have the structure of your data and the protocol, it defines your SAP. Well, the SAP is actually a bit further in the beginning, because it defines the questions that you need to answer. If you have your SOP and you have a lot of information, you can also define what kind of tables and listings and figures do you need to prove your point, both through the regulatory as well as internally. The results of your analyses can be used to write at least part of the report. A part of the report is just basically reiterating what you found in the study, right? So for the conclusions, you can automate that. So you have to bring these functions way closer together than they are today. And I think that AI, just by the concept of AI, will force us to do that. Is that clear now? Yeah.
So, well, Andy, firstly, just a brief introduction on yourself. You're joining us from Novo Nordisk. Maybe give a little bit on your background and then.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Andy York. I'm the Clinical Data Scientist Vice President at Novo Nordisk. So I'm the most experienced programmer, if you like, at Novo Nordisk. We actually changed our job titles about 3 months ago. So prior to that, I was Statistical Programming Vice President. So we're kind of reflecting the changing landscape for statistical programmers, that we're moving away from, just being this group that kind of like sits there and provides all the outputs that people need, to being really experts in our field of data science, or clinical data science, and actually understanding the data, providing quality and so on. So that's me. So I guess back to the question, I totally agree with everything that Richard has said. But I think there is a need out necessity to change how we do things today, because if you think about programming over the last 40 years, when I started roughly, the complexity has gone up dramatically. It's almost exponential in terms of where I started to where we are now. the volumes of data that we're managing and trying to handle, if you start adding omics data, imaging data, all the different types of data that we're now being asked to analyze and look at, just again, vastly increases the complexity. And of course, dual independent programming, that was a great job creation scheme as far as I'm concerned for programming. So we've done a great deal of work to kind of like, really create an identity for ourselves over the years. But the times are changing. And I think, whether we disrupt ourselves or find ways of disrupting it, I think things will come along and disrupt for us. So, Gen AI is here. It's not going away. All of these other tools that are coming out, and more importantly, I think demands from our customers to say, we don't like static displays so much anymore. Can we have things that are a bit more interactive, a bit more visual, and a bit more intelligent to kind of play with the data and understand what it is we're trying to produce? So we have to react to that. And I think, all of the tools that we kind of like start seeing today are going to become really important. The challenge is we perhaps don't yet know the absolute directions that are right for us yet. And I think that's something we'll see over the next year or so.
Now, I think something I try to remind myself is we call the AI industry or LLMs and the models will probably keep improving exponentially. So if I'm trying to solve an individual problem, which by the way, there's a lot of merit in just solving and doing the incremental things these two for people to adopt how they work. But ultimately it will come down to the same kind of thing where you might ask, what is now possible because this thing exists and therefore I should invest my time into that thing, and then the AI will just be there and I can use it. So I'm sure when the first SQL database, relational database came about, everyone, started storing their shopping lists on some sort of a server. But what was actually unlocked is some sort of a new system of trade management. And you might want to look into like what's been unlocked now. And even if the tools at hand, the models don't do that yet, you can actually just start with solving that problem. If you go too much the other way, you're going to get probably a lot of isolated solutions. But the industry will still move. So if statistical programmers are thinking about it, that might happen where you get stuck in they're solving one problem, everyone else moves on. So maybe it's also about getting everyone else on board with, hey, here's a new approach. And that's more of a dissemination thing. So I'm trying to figure out what's possible now that could be possible before. And that's counterintuitive because the temp urgency is like the Medro coding is going to be 2% better now, 80% faster. But maybe you don't have to do that at all because you can do the coding already. So, no.
I'd love to open it up to the floor already, and that's a question right here.
So we had a bit too keen there. And just, we've had a great discussion today, lots of really interesting presentations about technical opportunities and what that technology can supply to the business. I'm interested in looking at the other side, the demands, the business benefits, and in particular, since not much has changed in Sappi's lifetime, or mine, clearly there wasn't enough demand from the business for change to happen. So has anything changed on the business demand side that's really going to pull the use of this technology rather than technologists trying to push it?
I can maybe give a Novo perspective that over the last few years we've grown and grown. In fact, in 2023 we actually hired the equivalent of a company the size of Lundbeck. Now that's like 14,000 people. You cannot continue to grow at those kind of rates, and I think that kind of impetus actually makes it essential that we need to consider these. And accordingly, the business as such has responded by creating a department we call AIA, which is artificial intelligence standard specialists. They're about, I think, at least 50 strong, more than that probably even now. And now we have an automation factory as well, which we're now setting up to look at these things. So we're taking it really seriously, and it's business driven.
Okay.
I think there's an element of like reputational risk. So what do I mean by that? Sort of underground internet people or creating websites and communicating with each other in the 90s, but and they might have felt that, well, why aren't business adopting it? But and there was a natural delay, but as someone else starts adopting it, suddenly some of my OKRs to adopt this as well. maybe that's a bad answer. It doesn't give a timeline what might happen, but I think business leaders might start seeing how others are doing it to carry itself momentum. There's a factor of how fast it happens, and I think that just comes out on individual leaders when if you decide to do it in a notable company, everyone else will probably more likely to follow. So if I had a brand new idea, I'd probably go and find the most notable person so we can create that reputation as to others.
Yeah, I think that in the times that we live in today, yeah, it's not, there's not so much abundance anymore, right? In the pharma world, right? Like the low hanging fruits have all been picked. So companies need to be very careful about, given the risky business of clinical development, where they put their resources. And now questions are being asked, right? As I mentioned in my presentation, given the fact that we have standards, CDISC, and we have macros, and we have standard TLFs, how come we need 5 or 6 or 7 or something programmers to, do the TLFs after database close, or even the time before database close? Why do we have so many programmers or statisticians or doing this work? Why does it take so long when we have all these standards? Right? So there's a demand there, just a cost demand. And there's also, I think, a growing demand to assess the risk, right? You can go into one program, right? So what is that going to bring? You can go into another program. You can't go into both, right? What is the risk assessment? What is the opportunities? And I think that helping the company understand that is also creating a demand for really fast and agile solutions to start calculating this risk. So in the end, basically, the job of statistics is to put a number on the risk. That will help, yeah.
Yeah, eager. You were first. Oh, okay. Thanks so much. And Suni just pointed about matter coding could potentially be a little bit more efficient, but maybe that can be abolished altogether. It just reminded me of that notion of a new technology. Often we ask the wrong questions. I was just curious if you had any thoughts about what would be the right questions. Current thoughts about what we should be asking.
If I knew that, I would not be sitting here. I would be on a yacht on the Bahamas, right? So no, I think it will come over time, right? It's a little bit. I think it's like when the iPhone was, people would say, well, that's ridiculous, right? It's a thing that who needs that? But then demands the demand sort of comes with the application, right? And that's, I think, here as well. Yeah. People start thinking about what can we do differently, and how would that benefit us in especially decision making, right? And that's how it goes. But no, I don't have the questions, and no one knows, unfortunately.
I actually bought the original iPhone when it first came out.
Oh wow! Okay, there we go.
All my friends laughed at me and said, "What's that thing for? It's horrible," type of thing. And it was a terrible phone. But look where we are today with the number of phones that we have, iPhones or Google phones or whatever. It's really taken off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just to add, again, one of the imperatives, related again to your question as well, Novo has been this idea or notion that we could submit really quickly. And we have an ambition to submit to the authorities, multiple authorities globally, within 6 days of last visit.
Wow.
It's hugely ambitious, and we're still working towards that, and we probably will be for some time. But it shows the company drive, and to achieve that, of course, you can't have dry runs. You can't do things after database lock. You've got to do all of this up front, and you've got to have the right tools with test data if you need it to kind of help generate these things. And that would be AI, driven test data, for example.
Well, I do abide by the fact that if you ask the right question, probably halfway through solving the problem. I don't know. What came to mind as we were talking about phones, deciding to not have a keyboard on a screen was clearly, well, put on a keyboard, and Steve made a big point out of it, that we're not putting a keyboard because I think he was able to identify that having that keyboard was not the main thing of this device. The main thing of this device wasn't about the fact that you could connect and store things on it. So taking the problem was convenience and style in the case of iPhones. So then you might have said, yeah, what's possible now that I couldn't do before that moves us forward, and we get transparent touchscreens. So yeah, I mean, you can agree that yes, asking. Maybe the only best way of doing it is really zooming in, thinking very specifically about this problem. So it might take statistical programming and just look at that. You might be able to solve it better than just saying, how will this industry change? The scope of problems just becomes difficult to manage. But just my approach, I would see that problem. Yeah, if you find the right question, the problem you probably have to go through solving it. But it's hard to stay focused on it.
Yes. Verisian committed to changing how we communicate what science says to the regulatory authorities. We're all here think of how we might be able to improve that process. But trying to assemble all of its facets, it reminds me of something. First, just trying to make the question really clear to form your opinions. Okay? So I've been trying to swim this last summer. Okay, until this last summer. I can do 50 balls. Otherwise, it's breaststroke. With the grandmas in the pool. Can be that, for a while. But it's slow. So summer I wanted to be freestyle. Get in the water, swim properly. And what happens when I try that? I feel like I'm drowning. Okay, I can't breathe. Okay, if I could just get the breathing right, I could swim properly. So I'm trying to breathing right. Yes. But then it slowly dawns on me. My breath will work properly when my arms and my legs are doing the right thing. Let's start to look up caffeine on some legs. And I realized that I'm not going to get proper breathing until I can swim properly, and I won't be able to swim properly if I can breathe. And so I'm learning the skill when I look at LLMs, look at machine learning techniques, seen in LLMs, when I look at automation, when I look at SAS, Python, all it's a huge ecosystem. And what's not clear, maybe to me, but I would love to hear hints of this, just from your position. What would you attack now to plus or yes? What's important looks like it's right change to bring us forward so that the whole machine can take a step forward.
Processes. Just have a look at the processes. It's completely clogged. Everything that we do is difficult, and we need to rethink. What is so difficult about it, and can we change that? Can we integrate the processes better? I don't mind. I even don't care about using SAS and R and Python. And for all I care, you do it by hand, right? It's probably not compliant, but that's not what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about how do we get to a submission really fast. And so, in my opinion, instead of thinking about your clinical trial, how to optimize your clinical trial, you need to start thinking about how do you optimize your clinical program. And that starts with, way in the beginning, if you do your phase 1 trial, given different potential outcomes, what are the next steps? Can you simulate that? Can you help understand where it's going? So at what point are you going to say this is an absolute no-go? At what point are you going to say, okay, we need more data? At what point do you say, oh, that's a clear goal? And having these kind of discussions and making sure that, as Henning says, as soon as the data, as the science is done, we can go for the next step. You don't have to wait for the report and everything to be done, right? You can actually sequentially move forward really quickly and make sure that you have strategies in place for different scenarios. That would help, and that's what I would tackle. And then that can be done by machine learning. You can actually write shiny apps to do all kinds of cool stuff. You know that, right? Whatever, right? But that's what I would concentrate on, yeah.
I think as a functional area, I think we're actually quite risk adverse, and to me, I completely agree again with what Richard's saying, but to me, I think an element has to be of actually allowing people to take those risks to try, experiment and see what works and what doesn't work. It certainly worked in my career when I was a hands-on programmer, and I certainly think we need to kind of go back to that mentality. But what we've got such a rigid structure around what we need to do at the moment, in terms of how we program, how we check the programs, all the different standards and so on, that we're kind of really quite constrained. And it's, we did prove it within Novo when we actually did our submission. And if you haven't seen the YouTube video, look up Novo Nordisk R submission, you'll find it. And we actually were one of the first, or were the first to actually do a true proper R submission to the FDA, and we got some really good feedback from them. A few lessons of things we did wrong, but that's how you learn, and that's we took a risk. So,
if we were picking a word, I was thinking incentives, but it's taking the swimming thing. So for you, then in that scenario, someone has to be a change agent, if you will, and there's a price to be paid, right? So you probably might want to go find a coach, and that's cost, time, whatever. So what are the incentives for you to actually do that? I won't use you, but generally someone would do that, maybe wants to get fit or win a competition. And if they want to win a competition, if you're pursuing an Olympic medal, it's probably a very strong incentive to take that pain. So bringing it back to, I'm going to say statistical programming. So someone has to be the change agent. Someone, anyone, an individual. But it's not given that this person will commit to. I don't know how many times probably heard today about people in big pharma thinking, I'm just going to leave in 2 years anyway. So there's already zero level of incentive there anyways. So someone has to take responsibility for being a change agent and taking that pain. So the question becomes, what's the incentive? So for an individual, it's up to the individual. But if you're trying to get other people to do it, just follow the incentives, right? If you manage to, probably hard to do in large companies, but if you're in a startup and whether you're leadership or an employee and you want something to happen, you're probably going to have to play with incentives somehow. If you're leadership, you want to get your people to adopt a new method, give them bonuses, pay them more, make them look cool, celebrate them. On the other end, which I think happens probably a lot in this industry, is how do you convince people about it? There's only one incentive that ever works, is effective storytelling, but actually doing it as well. And doing it is the hardest one, because you're probably going to have to go piss some people off. But then if you're not prepared to do that, then it's a pointless conversation. As in, if you're not prepared to get a coach, then learning, you're not going to get the medal.
Oh, really?
Any other questions? Yep.
Hi, well, maybe more of a practical question. So, when we do a bunch of POCs using LLMs, one of the biggest challenges we actually find is not the identification of use cases, it's actually the infrastructure and the depth areas that we have. So we're kind of, it's normal to mix farm company. So we do have some good support there, but I can imagine if you're a smaller company and don't have that infrastructure support, I think it would be quite difficult to operationalize work. So, do you see that as a barrier as well? Or is that something that's going to need to?
Well, I would actually think it might go, and I might not understand this question perfectly well, because having been in large pharma systems. But it can go the other way around, right? So for us, for example, not having an infrastructure in place and also having the right incentives on people who want to do it, makes it easier to like build something new. If anything, more what I've seen more of, not too much, seen more of when people say the infrastructure is too big to actually change it to like bring something new.
Yep. Plus, I think that if you want to build something company-wide, like a RAG system, right? You need a substantial amount of documentation, which you probably don't have as a small company. So that would be a limiting factor for internally constrained LLMs. Yeah.
I think that we still do not yet know exactly how we want to use AI within statistical programming. So it's very hard to know what infrastructure you need to support something that we're not quite sure whether it's going to work or not. I mean, we have, again, we have some graduates that we took on, and we just said to them, just go and play these AI graduates and see what you can kind of come up with. And they're looking at SAPs, protocols, and things like that, to see what they can kind of come up with. But there's no guarantee of success, and there's no guarantee it's the right direction. So it's it's going to be a hard one, battle, I think, a little bit at times. But as I say, it will come, whether we do it or somebody else does it for us. So
I can build on that a little bit, because that's what we did as well in the oncology part at Bayer at the time. Basically hired a couple of people and said, they were really good AI and programming specialists, right? No clue about clinical development. And I said, you know what? Go play. Just try something out. And I'll be the one that sets the boundaries. So if I feel you're going across a boundary that the FDA doesn't like, or the EMEA or regulatory or whatever, I will let you know. Don't worry about it. And interestingly, the moment where I saw that line being crossed, and I told the team, so well, this is going to be difficult to do. They would say, why? I said, well, because it's it's actually in the guidance, I think. Let me look that up. And 9 out of 10 times, it was just a perception rather than reality. And I think that's also part of what we need to start getting rid of, right? Getting rid of the perception that something won't work. In fact, if you talk to the FDA or the EMA, they're quite open for experiments, yeah. So
we're huge fans of that, by the way. We're huge fans of that. Like, something's not possible, just go figure it out. Dive deeper. Yeah.
Kevin?
So I've been involved with a few discussions on using Gen AI in the pharma industry, and what I was looking at was just the things like drug labels, where they're written in a particular style where it's almost as though kind of technical writing form. There's a style to it that's very specific, and they have a huge corpus documents for it, such that you might say, would you mind using Gen AI to generate something, not in just any style, but in the technical writing style that is closed for this particular narrow niche topic? I wonder if there are other things. Like initially, your speaker was talking about narrative reports, and my initial thought was, oh God, no, because if they do that, then if something happens where it's trying to make a conclusion that you don't want to know. But then I got thinking about it. What happens if you have a particular technical writing style, or lots of narrative reports, or some other form of documentation that you know more about? Can you identify areas of legacy documentation where you both have a large enough inventory of those documents, and which you think that they have their own particular writing style, where you could train a local Gen AI model, not on the interweb or whatever, but just on those documents to do something in the style of something you already did?
I think I need to look it up, but I think I read an article about drug labeling with LLMs, exactly that. With respect to narratives are exactly that. It's just basically a description of what's happened. You don't draw conclusions from narratives, right? So it's basically you take the data, you write it down in a form that humans can understand. that's a perfect example of where you can use LLMs, right? The only danger is that it uses data that's not correct, so that you need to build in that quality control. But apart from that, that is perfectly possible. I could also think about clinical study reports, for example. The big part of it is basically repeating what's in the protocol, right? Saying this is what we plan to do, right? And then describing what has happened in the study based on the tables in the appendix, right? There's a lot of documentation there, and especially if you focus on specific indications or specific areas like oncology, for example, or perhaps immuno-oncology as a subset of the oncology. If you have enough documentation there, I think that should be possible, right? Yeah.
And do those documentations help with the style?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think that this clinical study reports, it's still very dependent on who writes it, right? I think this is like, so some people think it's like a novel, right? The next Shakespeare. Yeah, I think that if we get away from that and say, okay, let's see what is necessary. When the conclusion is a different story, or with the discussion and conclusion is a different story. But the description of the results of the study should be easier, right? Yeah.
I think the nearest thing I can think of is a tool we've come up with in the last 12, 15 months, again at Novo, which we call Novo Scribe. So it is about the CSR, and what it does is it ingests the clinical, the table data results data file that we create, so not the actual table itself, but the results data file. And from that, it creates the table in the CSR, but then it actually starts to derive the text that goes into the CSR around that table to kind of explain the results and things like that. Of course, that gets reviewed by the statisticians and the medical writers, but it's an example. And again, there must be an implicit writing style, when you have something like that built into a tool. I'm not familiar with it enough to know what that looks like or be able to describe it for you. But again, there's a certain way that medics or medical writers will go about writing the CSR, and I'm sure it'll probably adhere to that style. So.
Also with respect to a little bit farther off, but the QCing of tables, right? So we tried that out actually with some simple tables, and we had I think it was a demography. I think it was a demography table, right? And the demography table said, "This is a table about demography. Write a text." And there's no other context, and it knew that there were 2 columns and a total, so it wrote a nice text. And then we said, okay, we created some errors, right? Some obvious ones, like the percentages didn't add up. Some more subtle ones, right? The standard deviation of I think the age was a bit higher than would normally be expected. And we said, QC this table, and it did get the errors. And that was quite interesting, yeah. Because LLMs can't calculate, right? So it had to find other ways to do that. So I think that these kind of things, like all kinds of things where humans get bored to do it, right? That I think.
Well, I could approach this from many different directions, but maybe this one. So I think for enterprises, I'll put consumer products aside, like AI consumer products. For enterprises, the plugging to any service, plugging a language model without tuning it, like RAG tuning it, like any so. I think to me that's like, I was thinking that to me like putting an engine on a carriage and then just making the horse slightly faster, right? It's the real benefits are realized fundamentally by integrating, getting the knowledge of that organization to work together with the LLM. So it's almost inevitable you have to do that. Without that, it's going to look and feel like a gimmick and probably have a lot of errors. Because the flip side is an enormous opportunity. Organizations are organizations because of their processes and the outputs of those processes. If you take away those processes and try or like force them to be replaced without, for example, without telling to your medical writer that this will be in the style that you're used to, there's no point. Like, it'll obviously reject it because I don't even recognize this language. But if you took all of his team's previous reports and RAG-trained the model to it, just sounds like the inevitable approach to this. And I think even today, the most successful organizations that use LLMs are the ones that spend most of the time training it and fine-tuning it so it works for them. So it's inevitable.
Questions?
I think we've heard a couple of times today about comparisons between the clinical trial industry and banking as another example of a regulated industry that seems to still manage to innovate really quickly. And I know that banking benefits from open banking and regulation things like that. But we've also talked today about risk averseness and this perception that building bridges across parts of an organization would be difficult. I guess I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what, if there was one particular thing you could change, is it be it regulation or how the industry operates, that would help move the industry more quickly and allow for more innovation and more risk taking.
Faster decision making. That's it. Yeah. Immediately. Faster decision making.
I won't go last because I think I'll be controversial.
Well, I could be controversial and say kill off Adam, but that's another thing altogether. But that's my personal view. Kill off Adam. But anyway, I need to think on that one. So,
well, I mean, maybe we should have mentioned something else, but you mentioned banking. Even in our work, I sometimes feel like preparing a study to go live is a lot like what M&A bankers have described to me as their work. But one thing I know about M&A bankers, and I haven't heard of pharma, is they pay incredibly high bonuses to people. They create those incentives for people to work hard to make those things happen. You don't have to pay the highest salaries in all of industries, but change agents have to be motivated. And they do end up with 60 spreadsheets modeling businesses, but there's people who would not do that if there was no coolness and payoff for doing that work.
So you say M&A bankers are cool? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just checking. I don't know anyone, so I don't know them. So yeah.
So basically, the title of this panel is going to be "Kill Off Adam and Pay Us Bonuses."
yeah. Thinking about it more seriously, I mean, I think it's this obsession with quality that we have. Do we need such high levels of quality and within the work that we do now? I know we're regulated and it's really important for our patients, but where is the boundary here? Is 90% quality kind of acceptable versus 80%?
Right. So that is I think that's the worry about
certain data types, maybe.
I'm with you completely, right? But
it's more interesting because there's someone from Novo Nordisk says you can take a bit of a risk boundary. And in our startup, we're like, where do we question? We're still like, don't be out.
On the topic of lives and your brothers, the counter argument as well that not moving quickly actually also lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's why I say faster decisions. Yeah. My point.
Now, my actions level previous the bullets into the students. So it's interesting to know what are the e-colleges that's needed to SAS go on here.
I'm keen for Andy to take this and maybe comment on the title of just SAS programmer.
SAS programmer, yeah. So I mean, we are now clinical data scientists in Novo. We're no longer SAS programmers because we're recognizing that the skill set probably is going to change over the next few years in terms of what we do, and becoming more experts in data and understanding how to manage the data, report the data, tell the story, if you like, of the data. And you don't have to necessarily have to understand AI and large language models in order to use the tools, of course, that kind of help you there. So my advice to statistical programmers is kind of diversify your skill set a bit. In terms of maybe it'd be good to learn a second language if you can. Maybe it'd be good to learn some other kind of skills that you probably don't normally practice that often, such as being in meetings, being part of project teams, speaking up, presenting your position in terms of how the data should be structured, how we should report it, those kind of technical expertise that kind of have been a little bit under the the shadow of other functional areas perhaps in the past. So
Yeah, I can relate to that, right? I'm Dutch, and if I would only speak Dutch, I wouldn't be sitting here, right? So it's the same for programmers, statistical programmers, or statistical data scientists, or clinical data scientists, right? You have to start learning different languages. That's one thing. The second point is communication, right? How do you communicate? Be able to assess your needs, and learn to tell the story about the data. And plus, I think one other thing is it's important to get domain knowledge, right? So if you work in a specific field, go and learn what is needed, right? And if you work in oncology, it's very different from cardiovascular, etc. But start thinking about what's the real problem in that particular area, apart from the statistics, etc. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? How urgent is that problem? Right? And how does the problem manifest? I think that's
building that credibility for yourself and for the functional area is extremely important. So, so domain knowledge, I totally agree. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Sure.
And I just said how but it's cutting case.
So yeah, for start, I've only been at Novo Nordisk just under 2 years. So and some of this definitely started before I joined, and I think it came out of this, having really strong leadership. There's a guy called Thomas Sendovitz who joined Novo and set up the data science organization of which biometrics is part, and having a leader that really wanted to push, kind of the boundaries of the science of what we did and actually try and change us from, old ways of thinking as a pharma company into being that much more kind of progressive, I kind of, would put, largely at his kind of like level of, strategic thinking around the organization. And it's grown up relatively quickly. So, the AIA group has grown up pretty much in the same timescale that I've been there. So it's still pretty new, to be honest.
I think Shafri. I need to guys mention data scientists a few times, and like say when I started, it was like programmer. They don't SAS programmer. They don't statistical programmer. Now there's data scientists. I'm sure there's something else in between, but the role statisticians kind of keep that role as the ones who make the decisions to what to do, how to do. And do you see the role actually of the data scientists where the programmers are coming in are changing? I know in some companies they're also getting rid of the statistical role and they're also calling them data scientists, to which they're not happy.
rightly so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because it shouldn't be just a label, right?
Do you want me to comment on the data science for statistics, or? I think part of the naming is just. I think you have to go with the flow somehow, right? And with respect to statistical programming, I think that was getting too restrictive, and opening up the wording helps you to open up the role as well. I think that's what it is.
So when we changed the title from stat programming to data scientist recently, we recognised that there are a mixture of statisticians within our organisations. A lot of them still enjoyed doing programming, being really hands-on, and they were perhaps less technical as statisticians because they really enjoyed the programming piece. And I can equate to that because my own background is I'm a trained statistician, but I prefer programming. So I kind of specialised in that. So some of the statisticians may well become data scientists. It's going to be their choice, ultimately if they do that. But others are going to become a little bit more higher level within the organisation, a bit more strategic focused. So if you view the clinical data science as being the folks that are going to be more technical in terms of the data, the study, and how that should work, and the statisticians are going to be more focused on, well, how do we design studies? How do we make them as efficient as they can be? and credit powered, all of that kind of good stuff that a statistician will do. So yeah, so.
Very interesting stuff, because if you ask someone, let's say about the innovation, broadly speaking, this program, like only want new people to come in with that careers. I don't think anyone in Gen Z would say will hear the words of the program and understand what it means, or even be drawn to it. I mean, the naming probably makes sense 25 years ago. That's really close to this program. They will think, I don't know, writing JavaScript code to write apps or whatever like that. It just means something else. Whereas clinical data science, I mean, I talked a lot about incentives, but it's really cool for like nowhere to set that, make that change, and we can already see like not resistance, but it's new, it's different, but clearly needed. Yeah. I'm sure the number of applications grew and you renamed it.
It was extremely popular amongst the the programming type community, if you like, that we did that, both in India, for example, as well as Denmark. So.
That's not what I read an article years ago where the UK people would rather have slightly better title than the slightly more pay.
I mean, there's just hey, and I joked about hey, but you tell your friend who's a statistical programmer today, I don't know what that means, but people data scientists, they will.
I want to end on one last question, very brief. And what's something you changed your mind on in the last 12 months that you didn't expect to change your mind? Let's start with whoever wants to start.
I can start. So I was new to this industry a few years ago, and we were building out the stuff I was showing around data collection structure. And we hadn't, at least I personally hadn't ventured too much into statistical programming, but I just had this, and I was maybe talking to myself, but I just had this assumption that maybe you can fully automate biostats, and I've completely dropped that. This thing really happens.
Yeah. I think for me, it's been the culture and enthusiasm for change that I've seen, having joined Novo. Because there is a lot of energy there, and particularly from the ground upwards. So it's not, we need it as leaders. We need the enthusiasm to come up through the ground levels.
A little bit like that. As I'm moving from like big pharma to more smaller companies and working with you, for example, and other people. What I changed my mind on is the level of energy that you can get by moving fast. I remember, I remember a talk we had, and we said, okay, we need to think about some strategies. I'm not gonna say what it exactly was, but I said, okay, yeah. So let's do this in 2 weeks. I think then we, I can prepare a little bit, and then in 2 weeks we'll have that discussion. And you said, no, we need it now, right? And that creates a different dynamic and different energy, and that changed my mind. So I like that.
So with that, I think very realist and very optimistic. I think that's a great way to summarize perhaps this industry. So with that, I want to thank everyone generally so much for coming today. It's the first time we're doing this in London. We actually did one, I think I mentioned that earlier, in Hyderabad in May. We want to do more of this. If you have an idea, any ideas, anything you want us to participate on, we want to bring the community together. For us, it's very much sharing or giving a platform for people to share what they do that can hopefully inspire others, but also to connect people and hopefully, again, inspire them to either choose different paths in their lives on how they do something. At the end of the day, work is where probably we spend most of our lives on, and it's something that I also think is very meaningful, that you have to choose on what you do and how you do it. And so we've been very inspired by the hundreds of programmers, especially that we've met over the past year. And for us as an organization, we're certainly going to try our best to both not only build products, but hopefully support the community in other ways, such as events like this, which we fully sponsor and we fully pay for. There are no external sponsors here. And so hopefully you'll enjoy today. Please stick around. There's some drinks coming. At least
It's there, yeah.
And thank you so much to the panel and all the speakers.
No, thank you all. Thank you.